All right, good morning. Thanks for the invitation. Emma, I appreciate everything that the Chamber's doing to just accommodate networking in a virtual setting, just as a adaptation to our current scenario. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to be able to share some of my knowledge and expertise and just some things that I think the community can start to implement for themselves to be a little bit more empowered in their health and well-being at this time. So let me just briefly introduce myself, then I want to get into the content that I have for everyone. My name is Dr. John Stenberg. I operate Zenith Chiropractic, which is downtown Colorado Springs, one of the very few upper cervical focused practices in the area. And that means that we place a really high priority on correcting the weakest part of the spine, the very top, for a number of different reasons. We won't get into the technical aspects of that, but a lot of the concepts we're going to talk about today are stuff that I would typically discuss with patients as we're going through different phases of their care. A lot of these things are going to be, applicable to your life in the short term, and also some strategies and concepts that are important for you to consider for your long-term health. My office and cell phone numbers are both listed there on the screen, and I'll have my contact info here available at the end of the presentation because I want folks to have access to me, to consider me as a resource for you. And so any questions, concerns, feedback, things that you're wondering about, please, feel free to reach out to me in whatever way you prefer, and I'll do my best to support you guys. Okay. All right. So that's a little bit about me. Let's get right into the meat and potatoes of what I have to offer you guys this morning, and I hope you find it valuable. In the lead up to this particular talk, you heard about stress adaptability and your secret weapon or your greatest weapon. And this is going to explain that to you just briefly, but really what it is, it's a system of the body. It's a way that there are functions and things that are built into the way that your body runs that can help you handle stress, process stress, adapt to stress. And so understanding those mechanisms and how to access them and leverage them for your own health and well-being is very helpful. So when I prepared this presentation, I had two groups of people in mind. And anyone listening might fall into one of these two categories. And if you don't, that's okay. There will be something here for you as well. But the first group would be the folks that are really proactive with their health. They want to take full control. They want to be the ones to, know the cutting edge information right away and start to implement it. And the other folks would be the folks that, in this whole situation with the virus and the way that our community and society has adapted, the folks that have maybe felt a little bit caught off guard, a little bit unprepared with their health and well-being, maybe a little bit vulnerable. Now's a good time while the world is sort of on pause here to start to do an evaluation of your health practices and understanding, some of the areas where you have easy room for improvement, sort of the low-hanging fruit when it comes to your health practices. So for you folks, there are going to be some very basic, very entry-level strategies that you can start to employ here to start to shift out of that state of vulnerability to feeling empowered and feeling like you do have some things that you can sink your teeth into in terms of becoming a more resilient, robust person, that is capable of managing their own health and well-being. So that's the two folks that I have in mind here. And the goals are twofold. Number one, it's going to be to lay out some foundational concepts. I just want to introduce you guys to some principles that you can use to identify health practices that you want to implement, maybe some that you're implementing right now that you might want to cut out. And just really some big picture stuff that really helps to form the context for navigating your own health and well-being in the landscape of all the different things that you can do. And the second part of this is just the actual practical application aspect of it, which is, it's great if we've got all the correct theory, but we do need some boots on the ground, real world strategies to be able to implement so that it actually translates to a healthier lifestyle. So we're going to cover both of those bases, but I thought it was important to start with why. Right? We hear that a lot in business, and it's important to understand this key question, which I think a lot of us might not have been considering in a very meaningful way up until we're confronted with this challenge. And that's, why do we get sick in the first place? Just kind of let that land in your ear for a second and let that sink in. Have you ever thought about it? Why some folks in one household might get sick while other folks in the same household don't, when it's cold and flu season, for example. Or folks that work in the same office or the same environment. It's kind of an interesting thing when you think about it, right? The guy across from you at the next cubicle over might be, constantly sick while you never seem to catch anything. Why is that? And if we're to boil it down into two main variables, there's two opposing forces at work here, and understanding these forces and how you can mitigate some of these variables is important for understanding how to maintain your own health. And the way I describe it to patients a lot of times is you've got your internal resistance on one side of the teeter-totter, and you've got your external forces that are acting on you and against you that's on the other side of the teeter-totter. And so what that means is in times where your internal resistance is lowered, whether it's a high stress time, you haven't been eating as well as you like to, you haven't been exercising, there's just a lot of things that are draining you, or and your internal resistance is lowered, it takes less of an external force, less of a threat to your health to actually make you sick, right? And the flip of that is if you've got all your ducks in a row and your internal resistance is high and you're very robust and you're usually very strong and capable with your health, if the external invasion, if the forces acting against you suddenly ramp way above what your internal resistance is capable of fighting off, then you're more likely to get sick, right? So there's these two opposing forces at play. Now, I'm a big advocate of understanding what you can control and what you can't control. And a lot of times on the external forces acting against you, that's outside of your control. And the virus that's currently circulating through society is a perfect example of that. If you were to go back in time to January 1, when we were all forecasting our visions for 2020 and the things that we wanted to accomplish with our resolutions related to our health and well-being, I don't think anybody was thinking about, I'm going to weather this pandemic. I'm not going to get sick, when a disease from a market in China finally makes its way to the United States. So I think a lot of us are understanding now that we're fairly vulnerable to things that are outside of our control. So the things that are within our control are where we really need to focus our attention and start to be meaningful with the choices that we make. And that's on this internal resistance side of the equation. So just log that in your memory bank as we're talking here, because everything we're going to focus on, and what I want you guys to really take away from this is the idea that we need to focus on things that bolster our internal resistance, that strengthen our body and make it more resilient, okay? Stress is a huge aspect of that. And I think a lot of folks misunderstand stress in the way that it acts on their body. And if you were to just kind of poll the average person and ask them, are you stressed? I think most people say, well, yeah, I'm stressed. I've got this going on. I've got that going on. And often folks tend to think of stress as that nervous energy, kind of that anxiety almost, which it's certainly a type of stress. It's certainly a stressful experience, but that's just one very specific form of stress. Stress comes in all shapes and sizes. And at the physiological level, the way that it affects the way that your body runs and functions, stress is no more than a challenge or a demand to your body, right? There's a lot of good stresses that we actually apply to ourselves very specifically with very specific intentions, and we don't think of them as stress. A perfect example would be going to the gym or exercising and working out. And that is a demand on your body, right? It's a strain, it's a struggle. There's exertion involved. And the reason why we do that is because we want to become more fit. We want to become more strong. We want to have greater endurance. And so we apply the stress to our body. Now, the key is when you do a workout and you get stronger from it, it wasn't from the workout itself, because that's actually breaking your body down. It's when your body adapts to that stress and becomes stronger so that it can face that stress in a more resilient way next time. That's actually where the growth occurs. So as you can see, stress isn't always a bad thing in and of itself. It's when stress moves from being constructive, in that example, to being destructive, taking away from your health, that's when we start to have problems. And so the way that I like to categorize these different destructive stresses are in basically three main buckets. You've got your traumas, that would be considered physical stresses. You've got toxins, that would be chemical stresses, things that are in your environment, in the foods you eat, things like that. And then you've got your thoughts. So this is the mental, emotional aspects of our health and well-being and all the stresses that we encounter in that realm. And all these different things sort of pile up, and we have to have the tools in place to be able to adapt to these things, or else they're going to start to work against us. They're going to start to actively harm us. And so what we want to do is start to understand where we're experiencing these stresses in our lives. So doing a little bit of a self-assessment. What is the biggest area of stress for me right now? I think a lot of us, it tends to be in the mental, emotional realm, just with all the fear and uncertainty. But all of us have all of these different aspects, of stress affecting us. And we want to be able to implement strategies that will mitigate those, turn those things from destructive stresses to constructive. things that go from harming us to actually helping us, causing us to grow and evolve. So adaptability is at the very heart and soul of that. And I want you guys to cling to this A word, because adaptability is the thing that we really need to gravitate towards in this time. The businesses that are the most adaptable are the ones that'll survive. The folks that are the most healthy and adaptable, they're the ones that will weather the storm here, even if they do get exposed to the virus and do get sick. The relationships that are adaptable, those are going to be the ones that are stronger after this extreme challenge that we're facing. So you can understand that this also applies to your health. You know, the more adaptable your body is, the more resilient and flexible you are to changes in your environment, the better health you're going to have. So this is my working definition that we're going to be adopting, you know, for moving forward here in the presentation. But adaptability is essentially your ability to sense these different stressors, to respond to them appropriately in your physiology and the way your body runs, and then to evolve through them to become stronger rather than regress or to have these things deteriorate your health or chip away at your health. So that's the fundamental concept here, stress, adaptability, in the nerve system. So let's get into some very basic concepts related to the nerve system, because this is the part of your body that actually handles that adaptability, that does the sensing and the responding. A lot of folks might not know this, but your nerve system is active all the time. It's your brain, it's your spinal cord, it's this network of nerves. It's basically the electrical communicating system of your body. It takes every cell, organ, and tissue and wires it back to the brain. And as you know, the brain runs the show. It's basically calling all the shots in the way that your body runs, both on a conscious basis and an unconscious basis. What that means is all the things that happen automatically that you don't think about are under the direction of the nervous system. Things like your heartbeat and breathing and being awake and being aware, things like that. The voluntary aspects of what your body does is also, you know, under control of the nervous system. So if I wanted to reach out and touch the computer screen here or type on my keyboard, I would send a signal from the brain to my fingers to do that motor task, to do that little process. So everything that our body does is under direct or indirect control of the nerve system. So it does a few key things. Number one is the senses. You know, so we learned in grade school, touch, taste, see, smell, feel, all these different senses that we have. These are, you know, the way that our body interprets its environment. It's the way that we understand what's going on around us. Now, all these senses are then funneled into the brain. That's information, right? It's like if you receive an email, that information comes into your inbox, you then need to make some sense of it. So that's where the response comes in. So your brain will take that information in, it will process it, it will understand exactly what it's experiencing, and then it will send a response back down through the nerve system so that your body does what it's supposed to do. And a great example of this is even just eating something. You know, that is a sense of taste, right? You take that first bite of an apple, your body starts to digest it as you're chewing. It starts to produce enzymes in your gut and in your GI tract that are going to break that down and utilize that food for fuel. And it's an important response that you have, because you want to process that differently than you would a hamburger or a vegetable or something like that. So that sense and response relationship is happening very quickly and all the time. Cognition is another part of nerve system function, and that's, I think, what we tend to think of when we're considering brain function and things like that. And cognition is basically all the mental processes. It's things like thinking and reading and talking and sharing and interacting with abstract concepts and all the sort of intellectual side of how your brain functions. I think we put a little bit too much emphasis on that part of our nerve system function. It's actually the smaller component. All the unconscious stuff that we don't think about that's just running automatically, that's actually the larger side of what the nerve system does for us. But cognition is really important. As you're hearing me speak and looking at the images on the screen here, you're using this part of your nerve system to make sense of the words and the symbols and the concepts that we're talking about. And the common thread that ties us all together is, again, that A word, which is we've got to take all these different things, meld them together into a cohesive package of life experience, both from an environmental aspect, the things that are acting on us, the words we hear, the things we taste and see and touch and feel, the way that we interact with people in relationships, and all these different aspects of things that affect our body. We have to adapt to all these things all the time. It's actually amazing how much our body is processing without us thinking about it. There's thousands of chemical processes that have to be delicately balanced second by second and moment by moment just for you to stay alive. And that's the adaptability of the nerve system, coordinating all that function, just like an air traffic controller is keeping all the different planes coming and going in a coordinated fashion. So just understand that you've got this system at your disposal. And if you can leverage the function of the nerve system, improve its performance and efficiency, you're going to actually really improve the robustness of your body, the resilience that you have, and your long-term health. So we're going to get into some practical application stuff here, because that's all well and good unless you can actually apply it. So how to optimize nerve system performance. And I've got just a few key areas here. This is not an all-inclusive list, but these are things that are very approachable and accessible for most people. Breathing and mindfulness is a great way to basically hijack the function of the nerve system, cause it to calm down, and actually switch your body into a healing and recovering state. Dr. Barb went into depth on this with the last Mindful Monday. So if you haven't observed or watched back her presentation, I would highly encourage that you do that. She covers this in a lot more depth than I'm going to get into. So consider that a valuable resource. But some of the things that I'll talk to patients about with this particular aspect, focusing on maybe some of the mental, emotional stressors, would be strategies like box breathing. So the way box breathing works is you're sitting in a nice, comfortable position with your attention focused on the breath coming in your nose and out your mouth. And the way you're going to go about it is breathe in for 1 second, hold it for 1 second, breathe out for 1 second, and hold it for 1 second. You see that kind of makes a box. You do that for 1 second, then 2 seconds, then 3 seconds, up to 5, and then back down. It doesn't take that long, but what you'll find is in that process, if you're just thinking of following the steps of that procedure, you're going to find yourself calm down, your shoulders drop down, your muscle tension subside. And by the time you finish that practice, you're going to be less tense, less irritable, and in a little bit calmer state. This is a great tool if you get into an argument with someone, or you're in a very tense situation, you go sit in your car and you just go through the process of box breathing. You'll be able to calm yourself down and be level-headed again, and be able to think rationally through whatever scenarios you're facing. Mindfulness and meditation are things that go very close hand in hand, and there are lots of great apps out there available to you. You can download them on your phone and just, even for free, be able to leverage some of these resources to do something similar through a guided meditation. Headspace, Simple Habit, those are some that are really great. There's tons of different options there depending on your circumstances and what you need. So I'd encourage you to check those out. And then I added here filters. And this is my own recommendation for you. I think in a world where we're just bombarded with constant messages and interactions online and offline, I think it's important that we establish some very clear filters for things that we let speak into our lives and into our headspace. So if you need to be limiting your exposure to media, social media, TV media, radio, whatever it is, then I would advise that you do that. If you find yourself constantly being triggered or upset by the things that you're hearing, it's up to you to limit that input and to limit the exposure that you have to those sorts of things. And I think if you do that, you'll start to actually minimize a lot of the stress that we're experiencing. A physical activity is a huge one too. I think a lot of folks think of exercise as going to the gym, which we don't have the option of doing right now. So I want you to think about the physical activity piece of this a little bit differently, because if you can focus on increasing your non-exercise activity, which is not working out, not exercising, not exerting yourself to the point where you're sweating and breathing heavy, but just being more active in your day-to-day, that will significantly help your body process stress. Your nerve system thrives on movement. So if you can implement times in your day where you're just a little bit more active than you're used to, you're going to start to gain benefit from that, especially if you do it consistently. So one of the things I'll encourage patients with is just take a 10-minute walk 3 times a day, preferably after your meals. So you finish your breakfast, before you leave to go to work, take a 10-minute walk around the neighborhood or around your work neighborhood, and just get a few steps in, clear your mind, and focus on the task at hand. If you do that 3 times a day, not only will it boost your digestive processes, but it'll also just get some blood flow, supply the brain with some oxygen and some fresh blood, get your muscles loosened up. And it's a great way to just inject some more frequent movement into your day. Let's move on to the nutrition aspect of it. And I didn't call it nutrition. I listed proper fuel here because I think a lot of times we kind of think of food as sort of like almost entertainment or comfort rather than fuel for the way that our body runs. Actually, the brain uses up most of the energy that you consume. So you want to really feed your brain good stuff, have proper fuel for it so that it's running on all cylinders. It's running at a high level of efficiency. There's a lot of different avenues you can take with this. There's rabbit holes that you can go down with diet and nutrition. And I don't advocate any one way of doing things, especially on the extreme ends of the spectrum, whether it's ketogenic or veganism or all meat or no carbs or all these different options. I think if most people, the average person, were just be very strict, or not even very strict, but just mindful of 80% of what you're eating. I'm a big fan of the 80-20 rule here. If you apply real foods, and when we say real foods, we mean things that are not, they don't have a long shelf life. They're not loaded with preservatives. They're not packaged. These are things like animal products, lean meats that, were once living, plants, lots of fruits and vegetables and green leafy things and things like that. You don't have to do anything crazy. Just eat what you like in that aspect. If you do that 80% of the time and limit your snacking in between meals, you're going to jumpstart your nutrition by, a significant amount. And when it comes to supplements, patients will oftentimes ask me, what do you think of this multivitamin or that fish oil? Or should I take this? Or I've heard about that. Really what it comes down to for me is that the answer is in the name. It's a supplement to a well-balanced diet. There are things that we don't necessarily get a lot of in our American diet, even if you're doing a pretty good job with your food choices. So there are times where certain supplements are essential, but for most people, they're not necessarily at the point where that has to be as important part of the conversation. So just focus on eating some real foods most of the time. If you need to explore supplements later, you can cross that bridge when you come to it, but that's on a very as-needed basis, in my opinion. The last one that I have here is rest. Man, there's just no substitute for a proper good night's sleep. And it's not just the quantity of sleep, like how many hours, but it's also the quality. You want to make sure that you're actually going through all the different cycles of sleep. There's different parts of your brain and body that are rejuvenated at the different cycles within your sleep. So if you're short-circuiting or shortening that time that you're sleeping, you're going to skip some of those cycles. And that's why some folks might wake up and their body feels fresh, but their mind is foggy. And other folks might wake up feeling like mentally they're ready, but their body just is slow to get going. These might be clues of where you're missing some of that quantity and quality of sleep. So it's really important you get that 8 hours, do the best you can, set the environment, have it nice and cool, have it super dark. Don't have the TV on running in the background, blue lights and things like that. Just set the conditions and you'll have a more restful experience, even if you're not sleeping. I realize there are situations that are outside of our control. I've got a 16-month-old little boy at home, and there's plenty of nights where sleeping start to finish 8 hours is just not going to happen. So you got to find ways to inject rest into your day in other areas. A few other options for that would be things like quiet reflection. And this is an easy one that you can double dip on with your 10-minute walk. If you just limit your exposure, so not consuming content, take out the earbuds, no podcast, no music, no radio, just walk, look off in the distance, just let your mind process. In that 10 minutes of just letting your mind spin and letting the thoughts come in and then back out, it'd be super restful in its own way. And so if you double dip and pair that with your 10-minute walk, you're actually going to kill two birds with one stone there and find that you're even more refreshed and rejuvenated. And another one that I've actually been doing personally a little bit more meaningfully lately is just interacting with some hobbies and creative activities, things that we like to do, but we get so busy we don't ever get to. Whether it's fishing or working on your car, or painting or drawing or quilting, making music, things like that. Whatever it is that you like to be busy with, that's just sort of a creative outlet, something that's fun for you, that can actually be restful. So not every form of rest is just laying down and taking a nap. Sometimes just switching your mind onto another task, something that gets you excited and motivated, is actually restful. I'm going to add here my shameless plug, which is chiropractic care. The reason why we do what we do in chiropractic is because spinal stress can trigger that stress response in the body and make some of these other practices that you're implementing less effective. This isn't the case for everybody, but if you're curious about your own circumstances, there's a lot of great chiropractors in Colorado Springs that serve our community. So I'd encourage you to just have a conversation with a qualified professional and see if there's some area for improvement there, just to lower that stress response, maybe build the momentum that you need to kind of move into some of these other practices. The last part of this is, when you're going through that process of self-reflection and you're just evaluating these different aspects, whether it's the nutrition, the physical activity, the rest, these things, just identify what's the low-hanging fruit. Just start to work consistently on the stuff that's going to be the biggest improvement for you. I think we tend to play to our strengths. If we're interested in nutrition, we think, yeah, I'm going to do a better job with my nutrition, even though I'm only sleeping 3 hours a night. That's not the move. The way to go about it right now is to pick the one area where you have the most room for improvement and just start to be consistent with some subtle, sustainable changes. That stuff adds up over time, and it's really the time to do that. The nervous system, again, really likes consistency. So creating habits is not an easy thing, and you need frequent exposure to these habits that you're trying to produce in order to make them your new normal. So I'd encourage you to be mindful and honest with yourself about what you're going to actually do consistently, because that sustainability piece is really huge for having long-term benefit. I'm just going to leave it at that. There's a lot more content that we could get into here, but on this last page here, I want you to have access to my contact information so that if you have questions, concerns, feedback, things that you'd like clarifying information on, a specific circumstance that you're wondering about, please feel free to reach out to me in one of these ways. Follow Zenith Chiropractic on social media. You'll see more of this type of content, as well as opportunities to engage with me there. My phone number, this is my cell phone number, so feel free to call, text at 301-5893, and I'll be able to reach you there. And then lastly, email, so I'm available to you guys that way as well. Emma, if we have a couple questions from the chat that you guys want to address, we can do that, but that's all the content I have for you. I think you're on mute there.
All right, yeah, thank you, Dr. John, for everything that you talked about here. So you did talk about habits. Do you have any tips for building healthy habits, like snapping a rubber band or singing or something like that?
Yeah, the key with habits is just remembering to do it, right? I think a lot of times we have the intention to create a new habit, but if we don't inject it into our routine, then sometimes it doesn't happen the way that we'd like it to. A lot of times what I'll encourage patients with is, pair the habit that you're trying to form with something else that's in your routine consistently every day. Whether that's you wake up, you get your morning coffee, you read your paper, then do your habit. Whether it's the 10-minute walk, whether it's taking 10 minutes to be mindful, whatever it is that you're trying to accomplish, pair it with something else that you know you're not going to skip. That's an easy way to kind of inject it. And whatever you need to do to remember that that's a part of it, whether you set a reminder on your phone, you have a rubber band or something on your wrist that when you see it, it reminds you, that's a great way to do it. Some of the other strategies that I've heard folks take advantage of, things like visual reminders, what you call like totems. Sometimes folks will post a picture or a saying on their desktop of their computer or their phone. You might put a little, figurine or some sort of physical object in your workspace so that every time you see it, you remember, okay, I'm going to get up this hour and take a 10-minute walk. And just little ways that you can remind yourself and anchor to that habit with something in your surrounding or in your routine. That's a great way to just remind yourself. And once you do it consistently for a few weeks, it just will become ingrained and you won't rely on those tools quite as much.
Great. The other question was, do you have any specific stretches or ways to help manage pain while we are not able to go to the chiropractor?
Yeah, it's a question I get a lot from current patients that aren't able to come in. What do I do until I can see you next? And the truthful and sort of boring answer with that is that it does depend on the circumstances, what the pain is, what the circumstances are, what's causing it, that sort of thing. But for folks that are working at home, a lot of us are doing that right now. There's a few basic ones that you can start to implement. One I really like is the couch stretch. Just like the piece of furniture, it's called couch stretch. If you look it up on YouTube, there's a million different ways to learn how to do that. But it's one that really helps open up the hips. A lot of times when we're sitting, you start to get really tight in your hips, then your low back starts to ache and that sort of thing. So there's that available, and there's a bunch of different options if you can't do that one specifically. There's regressions for that too, so that you can start to work on that. But honestly, with a lot of the aches and pains from working at home and things like that, if you do the more frequent non-exercise activity, that's actually going to take care of some of that. So just being a little bit more mindful of getting up and moving every hour. Let's say you spend 10 minutes every hour that you're working from home, just getting up and walking around, not just going to the bathroom, into the fridge and back to your laptop, but just going for a walk around the block or going to the mailbox and back or whatever it is. Just start to inject more of that movement into your day, and that'll actually help with a lot of those aches and pains.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Dr. John, for coming on and talking to us about this. I know this is really helpful for a lot of people. I appreciate
the opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.